Here's a thread connecting three very different stories today: the comfortable villain versus the complicated truth. When something goes wrong, a mental health crisis, a brutal job market, a worry about our kids, we reach for a single, satisfying culprit to blame. A trial that started this week wants to pin a youth crisis on one company. A statistic everyone's sharing wants to blame young people's unemployment on one technology. And a new study just complicated one of the most confident beliefs modern parents hold. The honest answer is messier than the headline, and messier is usually more true. Let's start in a federal courtroom in Oakland, California. A landmark trial got underway this week, and the stakes are enormous. A bipartisan coalition of 29 U.S. states is suing Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, with 4 states, California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey, leading the charge in this first trial. And the accusation is severe, that Meta deliberately designed Facebook and Instagram to be addictive to children, that it knew this was harming their mental health, that it lied to the public about the danger, and that it illegally collected data on kids under 13. Legal experts are calling this social media's big tobacco moment, a direct comparison to the lawsuits that eventually forced cigarette companies to pay out more than $176 billion for downplaying the harm of their products. And the potential penalties here are staggering. One early calculation put the theoretical maximum around $1.4 trillion, though the states say they're not seeking a specific number. Let me lay out both sides as fairly as I can, because this is genuinely consequential, and both sides have real arguments. The state's case, in the words of a California Deputy Attorney General in her opening statement, is that Meta's business model has 4 parts: hook the users, hold them for as long as they can, harvest their data, and then hide the truth from the public. She said Meta exploited how kids' brains work. The specific features they're pointing to are ones you use every day: infinite scroll, autoplay, the like button, push notifications, and recommendation algorithms. All, the states argue, engineered with the deliberate goal of keeping young users on the platform as long as possible. And the state's strongest card, according to legal analysts, is the claim that Meta had its own internal research showing these harms, and downplayed it anyway. That's the tobacco parallel. It's not really about whether the product can be harmful, it's about whether the company knew and hid it. Now here's Meta's defense, because they get one. And parts of it are not trivial. Meta strongly disagrees and calls the allegations unsubstantiated and the proposed penalty vastly disproportionate. Their attorney made a few specific arguments worth taking seriously. First, he said measuring user engagement is a completely normal, legitimate business goal. Every company wants people to use its product. Second, he argued the states are cherry-picking loose language from internal emails and presenting it as if it were a smoking gun, when internal communications at any company are messy. And third, and this is the scientifically interesting one, Meta questioned whether social media addiction is even an established scientific fact, pointing out there's genuine disagreement in the research community about whether heavy social media use should be called an addiction at all. Meta also says it has built real safety tools for teens and parents. So here's where I'll be critical, and I'm going to aim it in a way that respects how hard this actually is. The comfortable story, the one that feels great to share, is simple. Evil company hooked our kids, lock them up. And I understand the appeal, especially for any parent who's watched a kid disappear into a phone. But the honest version is more demanding. This trial is not really going to be about whether Instagram can be bad for some kids. Almost everyone agrees it can be, in some cases. It's going to hinge on 2 much harder questions. Did Meta specifically, deliberately design for addiction while knowing the harm? And can you legally prove that Meta's design, as opposed to 100 other factors in a teenager's life, caused specific mental health damage? That second one is genuinely difficult, and it's where the big tobacco comparison gets shaky. With cigarettes, the causal link between smoking and cancer was eventually nailed down with overwhelming scientific certainty. The science on social media and mental health is real. It's growing, but it is nowhere near that airtight, and Meta is going to hammer that gap relentlessly. My take: I think there's a strong public interest in forcing these companies to open their internal files and be held accountable for what they knew. That's the genuinely valuable thing this trial could do. Regardless of the verdict, sunlight on the internal research matters. But I'd caution against treating the outcome as a verdict on a simple morality tale. If Meta loses, it won't prove that social media is digital tobacco in some settled scientific sense. And if Meta wins, it won't prove the platforms are harmless. The comfortable story wants a villain and a clean ending. The complicated truth is that we're using a courtroom with its need for airtight causation to referee a scientific question that isn't fully settled yet. Watch the internal documents that come out. Those are the real story, not the headline verdict. And the question I'll leave you with, is a jury trial actually the right tool to answer a question that science itself hasn't finished answering? And that tension, the satisfying villain versus the harder truth, carries directly into the second story, which is about a fear a lot of you watching may be living right now: the brutal job market for young graduates and the technology everyone loves to blame for it. Here's the alarming and completely real data. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the unemployment rate for recent college graduates, they define that as 22 to 27-year-olds with a fresh bachelor's degree or higher, was about 5.7% as of June. Meanwhile, the rate for all workers was 4.1%. Sit with that inversion, because it's historically strange. For most of modern history, having a college degree meant you were less likely to be unemployed than the average worker. Now recent grads are doing worse than the general population. And underemployment, grads stuck in jobs that don't even require a degree, it's sitting around 41 to 42%. So the pain is real. And if you're a recent grad who's sent out 500 applications and heard nothing, you are not imagining it, and it is not your fault. Now here's the comfortable story, the one that's everywhere. AI did this. AI is eating the entry-level jobs, and a lot of grads believe it. In a ZipRecruiter survey, 47% of recent grads said AI had already affected hiring in their field. It's an intuitive, almost cinematic explanation. The robots came for the bottom rung of the career ladder first. But here's where I have to do the uncomfortable thing and tell you what the economists who actually study this data are saying, because they are much less sure. And the reason is fascinating. Stanford economist Eric Brynjolfsson, who is no AI skeptic, puts it carefully. AI is not the whole story, but it's part of the story, and the evidence is building. Notice the hedge, part of the story. But then listen to Harvard economist David Deming, who looked hard at the timing. And this is the detail that stopped me. He found that the decline in junior hiring actually started about 6 months before ChatGPT was even released. 6 months before. As he put it, if the drop began before the tool existed, then the tool can't be the main cause. It's something else. And what does he think that something else is? Largely, remote work. Here's the mechanism. And it's genuinely clever. A New York Fed analysis found that companies became less likely to hire recent grads into roles that can be done remotely. Why? Because training and mentoring an inexperienced 22-year-old is really hard to do over video calls. When a junior role went remote, the whole value proposition of hiring someone green, someone you have to invest months in teaching, fell apart. So companies started hiring more experienced people who need less handholding. And the entry-level door narrowed. And there's a third factor that has nothing to do with technology at all. There are just a lot more graduates than there used to be. The share of Americans with a bachelor's degree has climbed to over 37%, up from around 25% at the turn of the century. When you flood the market with far more degree holders, a degree stops being the scarce, differentiating credential it once was. Basic supply and demand. So my take, this is a case where the comfortable villain, AI, is doing something subtle and a little dangerous. It's absorbing the blame for a problem that is mostly caused by other things: remote work hiring dynamics, an oversupply of graduates, and so forth. And a normalization after the post-pandemic hiring boom. And why does that matter? Because if you misdiagnose the cause, you prescribe the wrong cure. If a young person concludes, AI is unstoppable, I'm doomed, why even try? That's a paralyzing and largely wrong conclusion. The real levers, figuring out how to make yourself hireable in a market that stopped training juniors, developing skills that are hard to get remotely, standing out in an oversupplied field, those are things a person can actually act on. The Robots Took It is a story that ends in helplessness. The complicated truth is harder to hear, but leaves you with more agency. I'd rather tell you the version that treats you as someone who can still do something about it. All right, and speaking of confident beliefs that deserve a second look, let me end with a study that took one of the most rock-solid convictions of modern parenting and gently turned it upside down. If there's one thing nearly every parent and headline agrees on, it's that screen time is bad for children's brains. It's practically gospel. So here's a study that complicates it. Researchers in Finland, at the universities of Jyväskylä and Eastern Finland, ran an 8-year study. That's a serious long-term commitment, following 260 children from childhood into adolescence, tracking their physical activity, their sedentary time, and their screen time, and then testing their cognition, their learning, attention, and working memory at an average age of about 16 using a standardized battery of tests. And the headline result was genuinely surprising. The kids who had accumulated more screen time from childhood tended to show better cognitive processing as teenagers. Not worse, better. Before anyone uses this to justify handing a toddler a tablet all day, let me do exactly what the researchers themselves did, because they were admirably careful. And this is a perfect case study in reading science responsibly. The lead researcher, Petri Jalanko, immediately cautioned against concluding that screens make kids smarter. His key point: what matters is not how long kids are on screens, but what they're doing on them. Screen time spent on active thinking, problem-solving, creativity, and learning is a completely different thing from passive, mindless scrolling. So the finding isn't screens are good. It's the content and the nature of the activity matter more than the raw number of hours, which is a far more sensible and useful idea than either screens rot your brain or screens boost your brain. And here's the part that I think is the actual lesson, and why I paired this with the other two stories. This is a correlation, not proof of cause. And critically, this is the detail that keeps everyone honest. The exact same Finnish research group published a separate study finding that more screen time, especially on mobile devices, was associated with more stress and more depressive symptoms in those same adolescents. So think about what that means when you hold both studies together. From the same researchers, more screen time was linked to better cognitive processing and to worse mental health. That is not a contradiction they need to resolve. That is the truth being complicated. Screens aren't one thing. They can sharpen certain mental skills while straining emotional well-being, depending on what's on them and how they're used. Anyone who tells you screens are simply good or simply bad for kids is selling you a comfortable story that the actual evidence refuses to support. So my take, the value of this study isn't the surprising headline, "Screens make teens smarter," which is exactly the wrong way to read it. The value is that it detonates a lazy certainty and replaces it with a better question. Not how many hours, but doing what, and at what cost to what. The researchers themselves said the goal is finding a balance. Screen activities that promote active thinking alongside physical activity, which their other work links to better mental health. That's not a satisfying, shareable, black and white takeaway. It's just the honest one. And it should make you a little more skeptical the next time a single study in any direction gets turned into a confident parenting rule. So let me tie all three together, because they really are one lesson. A trial that wants to make one company the sole villain of a youth mental health crisis. A statistic that wants to make one technology the sole villain of a hard job market. And a belief that wants to make screens the sole villain of childhood cognitive development. In every single case, the comfortable story is a clean, shareable, single-cause explanation. And in every single case, the honest truth is messier. Multiple causes, unsettled science, real trade-offs, and a lot more nuance than fits in a headline. Meta's design is probably part of the problem. But so are a dozen other things in a kid's life. AI is probably part of the job story, but remote work and oversupply are bigger. Screens can genuinely harm and genuinely help, depending. The word that keeps showing up is part of the story. Almost nothing important has a single cause, so here's what I'll leave you with. When you catch yourself nodding along to a story that has one clear villain and one clean explanation, the evil company, the job-killing robot, the brain-rotting screen, that feeling of certainty is exactly the moment to get suspicious. Not cynical, just suspicious. What's the other 80% of the cause that this story is leaving out because it doesn't fit? Because the comfortable villain lets us off the hook. It gives us someone to be angry at instead of a complicated problem to actually solve. And the people who see the world clearly, who actually fix things, are almost always the ones willing to sit in the discomfort of it's complicated, instead of grabbing the satisfaction of it's them. Complicated is harder. It's also where the truth lives. Take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.